Hey guys, Into the End here, back with another Eternal video. Today we're going to talk about the event on that's going to happen on Thursday. This is the Dusk Road set number 3 preview or promo event. Now, for those of you who don't know about it, but I think you guys all do know, the event will be focused on 5 tribes that currently exist in Eternal today, and they are Grenadines, Sentinels, Dinosaurs, Unseens, and Valkyries. All the units that are of these tribes will cost 1 less to play, which is a really big deal. Costing 1 less makes some of the cards on this list completely broken. So that's a crazy bonus. And then you also get one of the 5 tribal specific promo cards. So each one of these cards interact with one of the tribes in some way. And the idea is to build a deck that utilizes these promo cards and compete. So the way it works, just like it is with Omens of the Past promo event, you have to build a valid 75 card deck. So 25 power sources minimum. You have to have an actual valid deck. And then with that, you can register for the event. And when you sign up for the event, you'll be given the option to choose one of the 5 promo cards, and those cards will just get added to your deck for a total of 79 card decks, for 79 cards in your deck. So do keep in mind that if you do play 25 power sources, you're going to be playing a 79 card deck. So if you have a pretty expensive curve, it is highly advised that you put in a couple more power sources to your deck to compensate for the 4 extra cards. Now, there's a few different ways to go about doing this event if you're trying to be competitive. If you're trying to have fun, then hey, go nuts. Make a tribe that you really like and make some fun decks. But if you're trying to be competitive like I am, there's a few ways to go about it. First, just like it is with the Omens of the Past event, there's just a lot of players who just took established tier 1 decks and just played it as it is. All the tier 1 decks are good, tried and true, full of very strong cards, and a lot of them actually just naturally uses some of the cards that are on this tribal list. So you're just using a great deck that has some of its cards discounted, and so there's no drawbacks to it. And the reason why that is a really good strategy is because anybody who tries to build a new deck specifically for the event, those decks are most likely going to be untested and not very well fine-tuned. And the players who are using those decks are most likely not going to have a ton of experience facing different archetypes and fighting against other cards. And of course, you build up your deck around these promo cards that you have never played either. So sometimes it's really hard to theory craft and guess what the promo cards interactions are like with your rest of your deck. So all the people who are going to be making specific decks with the promo cards for this event will have 0 experience going into the event, at least the first few times they play. So you get a massive advantage by playing an established deck that you're familiar with, and you have dealt with a lot of different situations in the past. So that I think you'll be able to make better decisions when unexpected events occur during your games. So I think that is a very good way to go about it. Second, whatever you do when you make your decks, don't restrict yourself to one set of tribe. A lot of the tribes share the same color, so you should just sometimes ignore what the promo card does for you and just look at the cards that are in the tribes and just use the good cards. Like if you were playing Time and you were playing Dinosaurs, there's no reason not to put in Sandstorm Titans, because now they cost 3. A 3 power Sandstorm Titan is completely absurd. And a Heart of the Vault will cost 5 power, and that's also completely absurd. So play the best cards from the tribes if you're in those colors, and ignore the promo bonuses, because they're still worth playing when they're 1 less. Well, they're worth playing at full cost, so imagine how good they are at 1 power cost less. Alright, so that's how the event works. I'm not going to go through each of the promo cards when I think about them. What I'll do instead is I'm just going to talk about the 3 decks that I have built for this event. I have 3 decks here: Argenport, Horroot, and Praxis, and I'm just gonna go through each one of the decks and talk about why I built it and talk about why I put why I chose the cards that are in it. And I'm gonna go through all 3 decks in this video. What I'll do is I'll put a timestamp in the description below so that you can jump to the deck that you're interested in, unless you're interested in all 3, in which case, great, watch the whole video. All right, so let's start with the Argenport list. This is just a very typical Argenport control deck. In fact, there's very little changes, a couple of very minor changes, I would say. This deck has picked up in popularity lately in Masters, and it's a pretty decent deck. And I didn't focus very hard on tribal synergies and bonuses. As you can see, I still use a bunch of cards that are not in any tribes, like Steward, Copperhall Bailiff, Tavern, and that's because these cards are so good that you don't need the discount 1 cost for them to be playable. In fact, a 5-power Tavern, I would argue, is still better than a 4-power Inquisitor Macdo. That's how powerful and broken this card is. So don't stop using great cards just because they're not in the right tribe. So this deck is pretty stock. I mean, you have a bunch of removal spells, you have Harsh Roof for clearing the board, you have some early game interaction, and then you have some late game interaction. The only thing I think worth talking about is why Copperhall Bailiff is really important. The current event really encourages players to take advantage of the synergies that are within the tribes and the promo card, and that typically means playing a lot of units. And whenever there's going to be a lot of units played, cards like Copperhall Bailiff and also Harsh Rule are going to be at a premium. So one of the, I suspect, very popular strategies will be an all-in Stonescar aggro deck or a sacrifice deck. Now, at 0 cost, the Grenadine at 0 cost, you can potentially flood the board with 3, 4, 5, maybe even 6 1/1s by the end of turn 1 or 2. And I think that is more than most decks can handle. And there's not that many tools that you have that are specifically good against that strategy. You have Lightning Storm, you have Plague, and you have Copperhall Bailiff. Of those 3 cards, Copperhall Bailiff is the most versatile one. You can use it against aggro, but you can also just use it against mid-range and control decks and get some Warcry triggers in. Or you can just shrink some of their units, knock Aegis off of their units. So this card is the best out of the 3 options. So this is why we play it, even though it is not one of the tribes that is being buffed. Now, Enforcer is a 2-power unit with the new rules of the event. A 2-power 3/3 flyer that silences things is crazy good. If you're playing Justice, put 4 of these in your deck. Don't really care what your promo card is. Don't really care what the rest of your deck does. Just put 4 copies of this into your deck. This card's amazing. 2 copies of Steward, because inevitably there's going to be a lot of Void shenanigans, seeing how one of the 5 promos directly interacts with your Void. The black promo returns Valkyries from your Void to play. Or no, you draw them into your hand, I think. So having Silence is going to be quite good, and there's going to be a lot of people playing Inquisitor Macdo, so this just passively beats that card as well. And so having 2 copies is pretty good. Harsh Rule is the reason why you want to play this deck over any other deck, because once again, this event I suspect is going to be a unit-heavy, combat-heavy event. There's going to be a very small percentage of players playing true control decks, so when creatures is everywhere, Harsh Rule is at its best. There's going to be not very many players that is going to be playing around Harsh Rule, because the event kind of encourages you to extend and play a lot of tribal units onto the board. So Harsh Rule is going to get you a ton of value every single time. Inquisitor Macdo, 4-power 5/5 flyer with Revenge is just pretty good. Tavern, of course, is one of the best Argenport cards. Even with only 2 targets, Copperhall Bailiff and the Runehammer, Tavern is still worth using, even if you don't get to draw a Minotaur or a weapon. Attacking with a 5/7 is still pretty decent. one copy of Azento's Gift as a haymaker against all opposing control decks. I'm not sure how many you run into this event. We don't know what the meta of the event will look like. My gut tells me that it's going to be heavily aggro mid range with very little control. So this card may be cut depending on how how the meta looks like. 4 copies of Roland's Honor Guard. This card is super strong. The 7 power cost is the only reason why nobody ever uses it. It's just too expensive. I think with a cost reduction, 6 power for 6/6 flying lifesteal is pretty strong. It will trade with a Predatory Cranosaur. Unfortunately, it won't beat it, but it can attack into a Sandstorm Titan, and it can pretty much beat any other unit in the air on their own. Right? So I think this card is really good, and if you can play it against any kind of aggressive deck, I think you will stabilize very quickly. And I don't know, 1 copy of Elias the Broken Wing because I have it, and I've never used it because it sucks. But maybe, right? Maybe it's 7 power. It's playable. I don't know. We'll find out. We'll find out. Although I highly suspect everyone who runs green is gonna have a Valkyrie Enforcer, and this is just gonna get silenced. And it's just a ground 8/4 that's completely useless. But we'll find out. We'll find out. I'm not 100% set on this list yet. I may make some final revisions after some more testing today. But this deck is really good against creature decks. It's okay against opposing control, but I don't think this is an amazing deck against control because it's very heavily geared towards units. So if the meta is full of units, I think this deck will be quite good. If the meta has a good balance of control and aggro mid-range decks, then perhaps this deck is not going to perform as well. I do also think that this deck may be slightly weak against the Praxis decks, which has a ton of card advantage by simply playing really big units that draws you a card or has echo or brings things back from the void. So I think you may have some issues grinding out time. And if they have a Zen and Obelisk in play, then all of a sudden the Predatory Cranosaurs are 7/7s, and you have a really tough time beating those cards. So this is the first of the 3 decks. Let's go into the second deck, which is my current favorite, but the worst of the 3 decks, I think. I just like this deck because it's fun to play. So this is the Horu deck. It's a combination of both Unseen units and Valkyrie units, and the promo that you're going to be using with this is going to be the Unseen one, even though I don't think it's very good in this deck. We don't have that many Unseen units. In fact, we only have, I think, 10 in total, so we may not even trigger the promo that much, and we don't have any way to benefit from all the skills that the promo picks up. I'm actually hoping to just not draw the promo because I don't think it's good in my deck. so and this deck is fun because this deck is very flexible. It has a wide variety of answers and tricks, and also some card advantage. So let's go through it. For the 1 slot, we have actually this deck has a very, very low curve because most of our 2 casting cost cards are actually 1 to cast. So we actually have a huge number of 1 power cards to play. And the goal is to come out of the gates very aggressive and get damage in with evasive threats. And hopefully you can close out the game before your opponent does whatever his deck is supposed to do. So you can turn 1 a Tranquil Scholar, pick up a skill, turn 2 Valkyrie Enforcer, turn 3 Spire Guard, and the guard will be a 6/6. So you put 11 power worth of 11 worth of units in the first 3 turns, and those units aren't bad. The units have silence and also a random skill, so it's really aggressive. A 6/6 on turn 3 will beat pretty much anything in the that your opponent can block with. Even a turn through Sandstorm Titan cannot block your Spire Guard. And we also have a lot of removal spells that will help us get rid of blockers if there are blockers. And the Finest Hours will let you punch through as well when you have no other option but to swing your units into their units, maybe even slightly bigger units. And turn 3, even if you don't have the perfect opener, you can still play a turn 3 Shelterwing Rider, which is a 3 power 5/5 Aegis flying unit. That's really strong for 3 power. You can't beat the 3 power Sandstorm Titan, but you can beat pretty much everything else that you can put down in 3 with 3 power cost. On the very high end, we have a bird, a Nostrix Lord of Visions. We might even go up to 3 copies of this card because it's really strong in our deck. Mentoring a Shelterwing Rider because it makes it a 10/10. And when you mentor something that flies, typically there's not a lot of answers for it. Because most players don't play giant flyers, and if they do, they won't have very many of them. The problem with really large ground units is that if you have a couple of big ground units and your opponent have a whole bunch of small to medium sized ground units, they can just triple, quadruple block your unit and it'll still trade. So you can't actually force your way in like that. But with flying units, it's much more likely that your opponent doesn't have 3 or 4 flying units, so that you can, if you have one bigger one and they have one smaller one, you will be able to attack them every turn with it. And that's what makes this card really good. Not to mention the 5/7 body on its own is pretty decent. And Roland's Honor Guard, I've already explained this in the last section. I think 7 power is a little too expensive, but I think 6 is playable. 4 copies might be too much. We may drop the copy of this to put in another Lord of Visions, or maybe even something earlier on, like adding another copy of Tranquil Scholar, or maybe add a couple copies of Spirit Guide to give us some life gain earlier on, in case we're playing against an aggressive deck that is that goes too wide, too fast, and we don't draw the Copperhaul Bailiff. And which brings us to the sort of weakness to this deck. This deck does not go super late, so if you're playing against a late game control deck, you will often run out of juice. You need to kind of beat the control decks in the mid game by cleverly holding up Island's Choice and Protect so that their removal spells are blanked. Because sometimes if they harsh rule on turn 5, hoping that they will clear your board, and you keep one unit that's pretty big, like 5/5, you can finish them off before they find another answer. And I think that's what you have to do to beat late game control decks. And it's also kind of weak against the super fast aggressive deck that likes to go very wide, like Stone Scar, Bandit Queen. If they have, turn 1, a bunch of Grenadines and a 2/1, all of a sudden he has 5 attackers on turn 2. You playing units 1 at a time is going to be too slow, especially because you can expect them to have torches in their hand. So I think if your opponent is too fast and too aggressive, this deck can fall behind, and it has no catch-up mechanism because our life gain card is a 6-drop, so we don't have any Spirit Guides. We don't have Harsh Rule to wipe the board. We pretty much have to just hope to draw Copperhaul Bailiff and hope that we have enough removal and tricks to keep our units alive to stabilize into turn 6. And that's not the greatest strategy, so I think there's some argument for cutting some of the high end and putting in few copies of Spirit Guide, which will help us stabilize a little bit in the mid game. Or another option is to actually add in 4 copies of Harsh Rule and just take out a little bit of the units instead. And I think that's also a very valid way to go with this deck as well. But because no matter how you tweak it, you're going to make yourself stronger against one archetype, but weaker against another archetype. So that trade-off has to be made. There's no perfect solution that just works against everything. And because we don't know what the metagame looks like, that's a little hard to do right now. So I think there's going to be some on-the-fly tweaking that is going to be needed when we play the event. So we're going to have to wait on that. All right, deck number 3 and the final deck, and I do think this is the strongest deck of the 3. And this is a Praxis Dinosaur Sentinel deck. In fact, this is just a pretty stock Praxis list with a few changes, a few pretty minor changes. Like, I think Praxis don't typically run a Canaan Monitor, and they don't typically run Twin Brood either, but that's just 2 cards. Everything else here, well, maybe not the Grenadine Joan, but everything else is pretty stock in Praxis. And also, although Praxis has so many different variations that are all viable, there are going to be variations of Praxis deck that plays Arcanum Monitor, especially the new ones that uses Tesia, a more of a go wide token strategy. So this deck is, I think, has the most powerful cards, individually powerful cards, because Sandstorm Titan and the Heart of the Vault are two of the best units in the game, with or without the bonus. And now they're 3 to play and 5 to play, and that's kind of, I think that's completely broken. And I think if you make a deck and you cannot beat the turn 3 Sandstorm Titan and turn 5 Heart of the Vault, then you shouldn't be using that deck. And also Predatory Cranosaur at 3 at 5 power is also pretty crazy. Grenadine Joan is free. So the reason why we put this into our deck is two. One, it gives us some early game weapon against opposing super fast aggressive decks that also runs this card. So that's good. Two, it works really well with Zen and Obelisk and Arcana Monitor. They get big pretty fast, so it's actually a pretty decent threat later on in the game. And of course, the more units you have in play, the bigger the Arcana Monitor itself becomes as well. So basically, you just ramp, grab power, and just keep casting bigger and bigger and bigger units. Against control, you have a lot of card advantage. Recurring Dawnwalkers is, as we all know, one of the best strategies against control decks with board wipes. Even the Twin Brute Sauropod, whatever. It's because of Echo, and each copy is pretty sizable once you have an Obelisk in play, and your opponent is going to be looking to answer them. Even if you just play one onto the table, he's going to have to find a way to answer it. So as long as you don't overextend into harsh rule too many times, you're going to have a steady stream of threads that must be answered, and you're going to eventually exhaust your control opponent's spells. Heart of the Vault, of course, draws you another card, replaces itself right away, does damage. It's a massive 6/6. This card does it all. Predatory Cranosaur is a great answer towards any kind of Aegis units, like Shelter Wing Riders, for example, which I'm 100% sure there will be many, many copies of Shelter Wings in the event. 3 copy of Liberate and Obliterate and Torch just to give you some early and late game reach. And this deck is pretty stock, I think. I think no one will be surprised to see this deck in the event. In fact, I think this is going to be one of the most popular decks. So you either play this deck or you have to have a way to beat this deck. That's what I think. Now, with the 3 decks here, I think the most powerful one is the Praxis one. And I think the Argenport might be the second best. And I think the Horror one that I like the most might be the weakest deck. So I might be joining the event with the weakest deck just because I like it the most. I hope to do well in the event, but if I don't do well, I'm not going to be too sad about it. I just want to have fun. And the reason why I think this is the order is because if you took away all the promo cards and you took away all the bonuses, Praxis is the best deck. If you look at tier 1s right now in the Masters top 100, you will find by far the most Praxis decks. Various versions of Praxis. There's actually, the ones that uses Tesia and tokens nowadays, but there's also the traditional one, both of which are very good. You're going to see a lot of Argenport control decks, and you're going to see almost no Horror decks in Masters top 100 or even top 300. I don't think you'll see too many copies of this deck. So this is the reason I rated them this way. I didn't make a Stone Scar aggro deck because I know that's not the deck I want to play. It's too boring, I would say. I have no doubt that deck can be the most explosive, and you can actually win a lot of games with your opponent doing absolutely nothing, which is really unfair. And I suspect that there will be a good number of players using that strategy because it's the fastest way to win. But it's pretty boring, so I don't want to do it. So I just didn't make it. But anyway, so those are my 3 decks, and I'm going to record myself joining the event the first time anyway, depending on, or maybe I'll even join the event 3 times using all 3 decks and record them. That might be kind of fun. But either way, I recorded this video way in advance. I will record the gameplay videos tomorrow when the event starts, and I really hope you enjoyed it. I'm actually going to post this video after I do the event because I'm a little bit worried that I joined the event with this deck and it sucks and I go like 0-3 and scrub out, in which case I'm going to not upload this video because then I don't want to screw you guys over with bad decks, right? So I'm gonna wait and hope to see a half decent result before I post these videos together. As always, thank you for watching.